Hey everyone, welcome back to LGBT Stories, where we share emotional, romantic, and sometimes heart-wrenching tales from the LGBT community. Today, we have a story that will leave you speechless. It's a true story about unexpected connections and the complexities of human emotions. Get ready to be captivated by a tale that will stay with you long after the video ends. Let's dive in. I never thought one simple moment could change everything. But that's exactly what happened the night my stepson walked into my room while I was changing. It was just an accident, just a split second where neither of us knew what to do, but what followed was something I never expected, something that still lingers in my mind, making me question everything. So let me take you back to the moment it all began. My name is Alex, and for the past few years, my life has felt like an endless cycle of routine and unspoken loneliness. My partner, Sam, is a business person devoted to their work, always away on trips, and when they are home, they're too exhausted to even hold a conversation. I had accepted this reality, telling myself that it was just the nature of a long-term relationship. Somewhere deep inside, I knew better. I knew I had been craving something I had long stopped believing I could have. For years, I lived in this half-existence, convincing myself that I was content with the way things were, telling myself I didn't need more, that it was selfish to want more. Then Jamie moved in after returning from college. Jamie is my stepson, Sam's child from their previous relationship. They had been away for some years, but after finishing their degree, they decided to stay with us while they looked for a job. When Jamie first arrived, I thought nothing of it. I was happy to have someone else in the house, someone who might bring some life into these empty walls. But things didn't stay that simple for long. At first, it was subtle. The way Jamie looked at me, not like a stepson should look at their stepfather. The way our conversations lingered just a little longer than they should. The way my heart skipped a beat when they'd brush past me in the kitchen, their touch lasting just a second too long. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was reading into it because I had been starved for attention for so long. But deep down, I knew the truth, and what scared me most was how much I liked it. The way Jamie's eyes lingered on me for just a second longer than necessary. The way their expression would shift when I caught them looking, as if they wanted to say something but thought better of it. I should have ignored it. I should have told myself it was nothing, but I noticed, and worse, I felt it. I noticed the way my heart beat just a little faster when they entered a room, the way my breath hitched when they brushed past me in the kitchen, their hand grazing my lower back as they reached for something on the counter. Once I noticed these things, I couldn't stop noticing. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that it was all in my head, that Jamie was just being kind. And I was reading too much into it, because I had been starved for attention for so long. But deep down, I knew the truth, and what scared me most was how much I liked it. I told myself it was harmless, that it was natural to enjoy a little attention after feeling invisible for so long. That there was nothing wrong with basking in the warmth of someone's gaze, even if it was a gaze I had no right to return. But that was a lie, because the way Jamie looked at me was not innocent. It was not casual. It was the kind of look that made my pulse race, the kind of look that set a fire in my belly, the kind of look that made me want to cross lines that I had no business even considering. And worst of all, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to resist it. Even one evening, as I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes, something crazy happened. I heard footsteps behind me. I knew it was Jamie before I even turned around. "Hey," they said, their voice low and easy. I swallowed hard, willing myself to keep my hand steady. "Hey," I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on the soapy water. They stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth of their body behind me. Not touching, but close, too close. I could feel the tension crackling between us like an electric current. "What are you doing?" they asked, their voice softer now. "Just cleaning up," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They didn't move away. No, instead, they reached past me, placing a glass in the sink. Their arm brushed against mine, and even through the fabric of my sweater, I felt the heat of their skin. It was a simple touch, barely anything at all. It stole the breath from my lungs. I turned my head slightly, my gaze catching theirs in the dim kitchen light. Their eyes were darker than usual, filled with something unreadable, something dangerous, something I recognized all too well. I should have stepped away. I should have put distance between us, but I didn't. Moreover, I couldn't. "Jamie," I murmured, my voice unsteady. Their gaze dropped to my lips, and my pulse pounded so hard I thought they might hear it. The air was thick, heavy, charged with something we both felt but neither of us dared to name. And in that moment, I knew that this was no longer something I could ignore or dismiss as loneliness playing tricks on my mind. It was dangerous, but luckily that time, nothing happened. However, the evening I was changing my clothes, it did. It happened on a quiet evening. Sam was out of town on yet another trip, and Jamie and I were the only ones in the house. I had just finished taking a shower and walked into my bedroom, wrapped in a towel. The steam from the bathroom still clung to my skin. My dresser was across the room, and without thinking, I let the towel drop to the floor as I reached for my nightgown. That's when the door opened. I gasped, my hands flying to grab the nearest piece of fabric to cover myself, but it was too late. Jamie stood frozen in the doorway, their eyes locked on me. The shock on their face was undeniable, but there was something else there, something deeper, something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "I'm sorry," they stammered quickly, averting their gaze and stepping back. "I thought you were downstairs." My heart pounded against my ribs, my skin burning with embarrassment. "Jamie," I started, but my voice faltered. They hesitated, their hands still gripping the doorknob, their body halfway out of the room. They could have left right then, could have walked away and pretended this never happened, but they didn't. Instead, they glanced back at me, their eyes lingering for just a second too long. And I didn't tell them to leave. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I should have said something, should have covered myself properly, should have scolded them for not knocking, but I did none of those things. Instead, I remained frozen in place, watching as they slowly stepped back into the room, closing the door behind them. "Jamie," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was about to say. Their gaze flickered over me, their throat bobbing as they swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to. I know. Let's just forget it happened." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. We weren't forgetting this. We couldn't. The air between us was charged, heavy with something neither of us wanted to name. Jamie took a slow, hesitant step forward. "Alex." My breath hitched at the sound of my name on their lips. Not stepdad, not Alex, just Alex, as if I were just a person, not their mother's partner, not someone forbidden. "We shouldn't," I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. They nodded, but they didn't move away. For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension was unbearable, suffocating, yet neither of us broke it. I could feel the heat radiating from their body, the way their chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. I should have ended it. I should have told them to leave, but I didn't. Instead, Jamie lifted their hand slowly, hesitantly, their fingertips grazing my arm. The touch was light, barely there, yet sent a shiver down my spine. My skin burned where they touched me, my breath catching in my throat. I knew this was dangerous, that we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't take back. And then they closed the distance. I didn't know who moved first, if it was them or if it was me, but suddenly they were there, inches away, their breath warm against my skin, their eyes searching mine, silently asking the question neither of us dared to voice. I could have stopped it. I could have stepped back, could have broken the spell before it consumed us. But instead, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I leaned in, and everything changed. As our lips hovered just a breath apart, I knew we had already crossed a line we could never erase. And yet, despite every voice in my head screaming at me to stop, I didn't, because in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the consequences, not even Sam. Only Jamie. And when our lips finally met, I knew that this was only the beginning of something I could never take back. Jamie didn't move, not immediately. Their eyes flickered to mine, searching, waiting. The silence between us stretched unbearably long, but I couldn't look away. My heart pounded so loudly I swore they could hear it. "You don't want me to go, do you?" they finally asked, their voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the fabric still pressed to my chest. My lips parted, but no words came out because they were right. I didn't want them to go. I didn't understand why, but something about the moment, about them, held me in place. They took a step closer, their gaze never leaving mine. "Tell me to leave," they murmured again, "and I will." I should have said it. I should have found the strength to send them away, to keep this from spiraling into something neither of us could take back. But my breath caught in my throat, and the words refused to come. Jamie's jaw tensed as if they were battling with themselves, but then slowly their hand reached out. I felt the warmth of their fingertips before they even touched me, hovering just above my arm, hesitating. "Dad." Their voice cracked slightly, uncertain. My breath hitched. My skin burned beneath their gaze. I didn't know why they were calling me Dad since I wasn't even their real dad, but I kind of liked it. And then, against every ounce of logic, I let my hand fall away from my chest, allowing the fabric of my blouse to loosen slightly. Their eyes darkened. They exhaled sharply, their restraint visibly frayed at the edges. I should have been afraid. I should have put a stop to this before it went any further, but the truth was, I had never felt more alive than I did in that moment. More seen, more wanted. Jamie's hand finally closed the distance. Their fingers grazed my bare shoulder. A shiver ran down my spine, and I gasped softly. They froze, their lips parting, their breath shallow. I knew I should step away, break the moment, but I didn't. I couldn't. Their touch was hesitant at first, careful, as if testing to see if I would push them away. When I didn't, they moved closer. Their palms smoothed down the length of my arm in a slow, deliberate motion. My skin erupted in goosebumps. Every nerve in my body was hyper-aware of their touch. "Tell me to stop," they murmured, their voice rough, desperate. I couldn't. I wouldn't. Instead, I reached up, my own fingers trembling as they brushed against their wrist. Their pulse was racing beneath my touch, just as erratic as my own. They sucked in a sharp breath. Their gaze flickered between my lips and my eyes, as if silently asking permission. And then they closed the full distance. Their lips barely grazed mine at first, a whisper of contact, tentative and unsure. But the moment I didn't pull away, something shifted. Their hand moved to my waist, fingers curling around my hip, pulling me closer. A soft whimper escaped me, and that was all it took for their restraint to snap. The kiss deepened, slow at first but quickly gaining urgency. Their fingers slid into my hair, angling my face to fit perfectly against theirs. The warmth of their body pressed against mine, and I felt myself melting into them, surrendering to the fire igniting between us. I couldn't think. All I could focus on was the way they felt, the way they kissed me like they had been starving for this moment, for me. And the worst part was, I felt the same. Jamie groaned against my lips. Their grip tightened as if afraid I would pull away, but I didn't. I clung to them, my fingers digging into their shoulders as heat pooled low in my stomach. My blouse slipped further down my arms, forgotten in the intensity of the moment. Their hands moved, skimming over my skin with a reverence that made me shudder. "God, Dad," they whispered, their forehead pressing against mine. "What are we doing?" I should have answered. I should have told them this was wrong, that we needed to stop, but instead, I captured their lips again, my own answers spoken through the desperate way I kissed them. We weren't thinking. We weren't rational. But none of that mattered because right then, we didn't want to stop. And so we didn't. The air between us thickened, stretching taut with something neither of us could bring ourselves to acknowledge. My breath came in short, uneven gasps as Jamie's fingers twitched at their sides, as if warring with themselves over what to do next. The weight of their gaze pressed against my skin, igniting a slow burn that coiled deep in my stomach. I should have ended it right then, should have forced myself to step back, create distance, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I let the moment linger, let the electricity pulse between us. Jamie's jaw clenched, their muscles tightening beneath their shirt. I should go, they murmured, though the word sounded more like a plea for me to stop them rather than a genuine intention to leave. "Then why aren't you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Their eyes darkened. Their restraint teetered on the edge of collapse. "Because you don't want me to?" I swallowed hard. My pulse hammered against my ribs. They were right. I didn't. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Their fingers curled into my hips, pulling me flush against them, and I gasped into their mouth. My hands roamed over their chest, feeling the firm muscles beneath their shirt, the steady pound of their heartbeat against my palm. "This is crazy," I whispered against their lips, but even as I said the words, I didn't mean them. Jamie groaned. Their grip tightened. "I know." And yet neither of us stopped. I was unraveling piece by piece, consumed by this impossible desire. There were no thoughts of right or wrong, no lingering doubts. Only Jamie and the way they made me feel alive, wanted. Jamie lifted me onto the counter, their hands firm against my thighs as they stepped between them. My legs wrapped around their waist instinctively, pulling them closer, anchoring myself to them. I could feel their breath against my skin, hot and uneven, matching the erratic rhythm of my own. Every nerve in my body was alight, every inch of me screaming for more. "Are you sure?" Jamie whispered, their voice strained, their restraint hanging by a thread. I met their gaze, searching for any hesitation, any doubt. There was none. I nodded. Yes, that was all they needed. They kissed me again, deeper this time, and I surrendered completely. When it was over, we stayed like that for a long time, our breath mingling in the quiet aftermath. Jamie's fingers brushed lazily over my arm, tracing invisible patterns against my skin. I shivered beneath their touch, my body still humming with the aftershocks of what we had done. Reality threatened to creep in, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Jamie pressed a soft kiss to my shoulder, their grip on my waist still firm, as if afraid to let me go. "Are you okay?" they murmured. I exhaled, my fingers ghosting over their jaw. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. They tensed slightly. "Do you regret it?" I hesitated, searching for an answer that wouldn't feel like a lie. Did I? Should I? "I don't know," I said again because it was the truth. Jamie sighed, resting their forehead against my collarbone. "If that helps, I don't." And it did, more than I was willing to admit. But as the haze of passion faded, the weight of our actions settled between us. This was dangerous, reckless. And yet, as I sat there in their arms, the warmth of their body still pressed against mine, I couldn't bring myself to care. Not yet. Jamie finally pulled away, brushing their thumb over my cheek before stepping back. The absence of their warmth was immediate, jarring. "I should go," they said again, but this time their voice was laced with reluctance. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I wanted them to leave. They hesitated for a moment longer before finally turning, disappearing into the dimly lit hallway. And as soon as they were gone, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the counter. My entire body still reeled from what had just happened. I had crossed a line, one I could never uncross. And yet, even as guilt curled in my stomach, even as I told myself this was a mistake, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. It was far from over. I was right because, after ignoring each other for a couple of hours, things were getting crazy again. I hadn't seen them since they left my room. Hours passed slow and torturous, filled with nothing but the weight of what we had done and the echo of their touch still lingering on my skin. I busied myself with anything I could, cleaning, making tea I never drank, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, but nothing could quiet the storm in my mind. And then I heard footsteps. Jamie. I didn't turn at first, keeping my focus on the kitchen counter as I absently wiped a spotless surface, but I felt them, their presence behind me, heavy and unmistakable. My hands trembled slightly as I sat down the dish towel. "You've been avoiding me." Their voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite name. I exhaled, finally turning to face them. "I thought you might need space." They leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over their chest, their gaze unreadable. Silence stretched between us. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to hold their stare. There was no running from this, not anymore. Jamie stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Do you regret it?" The question sent a shiver through me, but I kept my voice even. "You already asked that, Jamie." "I don't know." Their jaw tensed. "I don't," I swallowed. "This is complicated." They gave a humorless chuckle, shaking their head. "Yeah, I know. No, I wanted to tell them we needed to stop, that this was dangerous, that it couldn't happen again, but as they took another step closer, the words died in my throat. I can't pretend that nothing happened, they said, their voice quieter now, laced with something raw. And I don't think you can either. I exhaled sharply, my resolve crumbling. That doesn't mean we should do it again. Jamie studied me for a long moment, their eyes searching mine. Then tell me you don't want to. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I couldn't lie. Their fingers brushed against my arm, feather-light, sending a tremor through me. That's what I thought. I should have walked away. I should have put an end to this before we spiraled even further. But when they reached for me, their touch hesitant, waiting for my permission, I didn't pull away. Instead, I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. The tension snapped. Jamie's lips were on mine before I could take another breath, their hands gripping my waist as if afraid I'd slip away. The kiss was slow at first, uncertain, both of us testing the fragile line we were about to obliterate. But then I melted into them, fingers tangling in their hair, and there was no turning back. Their hands traced the curve of my back, pulling me flush against them, and I gasped into the kiss. My body burned from the inside out. Everything else, guilt, reason, consequences, disappeared, swallowed by the need coursing through me. Alex, Jamie murmured against my lips, their voice rough, desperate. I had never heard my name sound like that before, like a prayer, like a plea. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I pulled them closer, surrendering to the inevitable. As I caught my breath, my hands still resting against their chest, reality started to seep in again. My heart was racing, but this time it wasn't just from the fire between us. It was from the weight of what we were doing, what we had done. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to say the words that had been lingering in the back of my mind. We're not going to do this again, right? Jamie's fingers ghosted over my waist, their grip hesitant, like they were trying to convince themselves to let go, but couldn't quite bring themselves to. Their gaze locked onto mine, dark and searching. Do you really want me to say we won't? I wanted to. I should have. But the heat in their eyes, the way my body still ached for them, made it impossible to answer. Instead, I whispered, Jamie, we can't. Your dad will be arriving soon. Their jaw clenched, and for a moment, they didn't move. Their fingers tightened slightly on my skin. Then, with a slow exhale, they stepped back, creating space between us that felt like a chasm. I know, they said, their voice rough and reluctant. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, trying to ignore the emptiness their absence left behind. But as I looked at them, standing there, watching me with an intensity that sent another shiver down my spine, I let my guard down again. Their fingers traced along the curve of my hip, slow and deliberate, as if they were memorizing every inch of me. My skin erupted in goosebumps, and I bit my lip trying to steady myself, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. But control had left the room the moment they had stepped inside. Are you sure? Jamie's voice was barely above a whisper, their breath warm against my cheek. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. You know I'm not, but I feel like I don't have a choice. That was all they needed. Their lips captured mine in a slow, deep kiss. Their hands tightened around my waist as they pulled me closer. A quiet sound escaped me. My body responded to them in ways I hadn't felt in years. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, more desperate, as if we were making up for all the time we had spent holding back. Jamie's hand slid up my back, fingers splayed against my bare skin, igniting something raw and uncontrollable inside me. I pressed into them, feeling the hard lines of their body against mine, the steady thrum of their heartbeat mirroring my own. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and surrendering to the fall. I tangled my fingers in their hair, pulling them even closer, losing myself in the moment, in the heat of them. The air between us crackled with intensity, a tension so thick it felt like it could snap at any moment. But then a noise outside the room made us both freeze. Jamie pulled back just enough to meet my gaze, their breathing uneven. Did you hear that? I nodded, my own breath shaky, my heart pounding against my ribs. My mind was still clouded, my body still alight with the remnants of their touch. But the sharp knock on the door sent a cold wave of reality crashing over me. Alex, My stomach twisted violently. It was Sam, my partner. Panic surged through me, and I pushed Jamie back, scrambling to adjust my robe, smooth my hair, erase any trace of what had just happened. Jamie ran a hand through their tousled hair, their jaw tight as they took a step back, their chest rising and falling rapidly. "Alex, are you in there?" Sam's voice was closer now, more insistent. Jamie and I exchanged a look, and in that moment, I saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. This was a line we could never uncross, a secret we could never undo, and now we were seconds away from being caught. I turned toward the door, swallowing down my panic, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Yeah, I'm here. Why is the door locked?" My breath hitched. When had I locked it? I hadn't even realized. Jamie moved quickly, stepping toward the window, their movements silent and practiced. They glanced back at me, and I saw the silent question in their eyes. "Do you want me to stay?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, and in that second, Sam knocked again, louder this time. Jamie took that as their answer. Without another word, they slipped through the window, disappearing into the night, just as I reached for the door handle. My fingers trembled as I took one last deep breath, smoothing down my robe, composing myself. Then I opened the door. Sam stood there, their brow furrowed, their eyes scanning my face. Why was the door locked? I forced a smile, hoping they couldn't hear the erratic pounding of my heart. I was just getting dressed. I must have locked it without thinking. They studied me for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. All right. Relief washed over me. But it was short-lived because even as Sam turned away, walking down the hall, I could still feel Jamie's presence in the room, lingering like a ghost, like a temptation I couldn't resist. My hands were still shaking as I reached for the edge of the dresser. My body buzzed with the aftermath of everything that had just happened. My reflection in the mirror caught my eye, and I almost didn't recognize myself. The flush in my cheeks, the wild look in my eyes, the way my lips were still slightly parted, tingling from their kisses. With a slow exhale, I forced myself to move, to shake off the day that clung to me like a second skin. I crossed the room, grabbing my robe from the chair and wrapping it tightly around myself, as if that would somehow shield me from what had just transpired. My legs felt weak as I padded toward the in-soot bathroom, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. Inside, I turned on the faucet and splashed cool water onto my face, gripping the edge of the sink as I stared at my reflection. My pulse was still racing, my lips still swollen from their touch. I inhaled sharply, trying to push down the rush of emotions clawing their way to the surface. This is insanity. What have I done? I reached for a towel and dried my face, lingering for a moment as if waiting for the woman in the mirror to look different, as if she would suddenly show some sense of shame or remorse. But she didn't, because deep down, I wasn't sure if I regretted any of it. Still, I needed to get a hold of myself. I stepped back into my bedroom. The room felt heavier now, charged with something I couldn't quite name. I hesitated at the bed, my hands lingering over the sheets that still carried their warmth. The scent of them was still there, faint but undeniable, woven into the fabric like a ghost of their presence. Shaking my head, I quickly stripped the bed, gathering the sheets in a bundle and tossing them into the laundry hamper. The fresh linen I pulled from the closet felt crisp, untouched as I spread it across the mattress, as if that alone could erase what had happened tonight. Once the bed was remade, I finally climbed in, slipping beneath the covers and staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. I could still feel them, the way their hands had gripped my waist, the way they had whispered my name, the way they had made me feel more alive than I had in years. I turned on my side, squeezing my eyes shut as if willing sleep to come, hoping it would somehow dull the chaos inside me. The weight of the night still clung to me as I lay there, my breath uneven, my thoughts a tangled mess. Jamie had finally left, their absence leaving behind an unbearable silence. The sheets were still warm, their scent still lingering in the air, making it impossible to convince myself that none of it had happened. I turned onto my side, gripping the pillow as if it could anchor me back to reality, but reality had already changed. Everything had changed. The rational part of me screamed that this was a terrible mistake, that I had crossed a line that could never be redrawn. But another part, one I had buried for too long, whispered that for the first time in years, I had felt something real. The house was still dark, the only light spilling from the bathroom door I had left cracked open. I could hear the soft hum of the heating system, the distant ticking of the clock on my nightstand. I tried to focus on those mundane details to force my mind away from the memory of Jamie's hands, the way they had held me, the way they had looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. A soft knock at the door shattered the fragile quiet. I froze, my pulse spiking for a moment. I thought I had imagined it, but then another knock, quieter, hesitant. Jamie. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. I should ignore it. I should stay in bed, pretend to be asleep. Let this night be the end of whatever it was we had started. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I was already moving, already reaching for the doorknob with trembling fingers. I cracked the door open just enough to see them standing there, their expression unreadable in the dim hallway light. They had thrown on a t-shirt and sweatpants, their hair still slightly tousled, their jaw tense, their hands curled in a fist at their sides, as if they were fighting some internal battle. I know I should go, they murmured, their voice low and strained, but I can't. Neither could I. I stepped back without a word, letting the door open wider. Jamie hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. Their presence overwhelmed the space between us. The air was thick, charged with everything we hadn't said, everything we had already done. I don't know what's happening to us, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to stop it. Jamie exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of their neck. I don't think I want to stop, they admitted, their voice raw with honesty. And that scares the hell out of me. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the fabric of my nightshirt. We can't keep doing this. They stepped closer, but this time they didn't reach for me. Their hands stayed at their sides, tense like they were holding themselves back. Then tell me to leave, they whispered. Tell me to walk away. I opened my mouth, ready to say the words, to put an end to this before it spiraled even further out of control, but no sound came out because I didn't want them to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Jamie saw the answer in my silence. They let out a slow breath, dragging a hand through their hair before looking at me again. I know this is wrong, they murmured, their voice laced with something dangerous, but that doesn't change how I feel. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, willing myself to find the strength to do what was right. Jamie, I whispered, this has to stop. The words tasted hollow even to me. Jamie studied me, searching my face as if looking for something, maybe a reason to fight, maybe a reason to walk away. Their jaw tightened, and for the first time, they looked uncertain. After a long pause, they gave a slow, reluctant nod. I know, but there was no conviction in their voice, no finality. They lingered for a second longer before turning toward the door. I watched them go, feeling something inside me twist, something raw and unspeakable. They paused when they reached the doorway, their shoulders rising and falling with an uneven breath. If you tell me to forget this, I will, they said quietly, but I don't think either of us can. I couldn't answer. I didn't have the words. They hesitated a moment longer, then finally stepped out into the hallway. The soft click of the door, shutting behind them, felt far too loud in the silence that followed. I stood there, motionless, my heart pounding against my ribs, my thoughts a mess of contradictions. I turned toward my bed, climbing under the covers, staring at the ceiling as the weight of the night settled over me like a suffocating blanket. This couldn't continue. It wasn't just about us. It was about Sam, about the fragile life we had all built under the same roof. Sooner or later, this would unravel. The fallout would be catastrophic. And yet, as much as I told myself this was over, as much as I tried to convince myself that I had put an end to it tonight, deep down, I knew the truth. Thank you so much for watching this emotional and complex story. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt LGBT stories. Don't forget to leave a comment below and share your thoughts on this story. What do you think will happen next? What would you do in a situation like this? Let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next video.